Hello, and welcome to tonight's webinar. My name is Jennifer Springer, and I'm with the Center for Teaching and Learning, and we are thrilled to help support the SHS webinar this evening. Very brief housekeeping items to cover before I pass it over. Remember, this webinar is being recorded, and we will post it to our CTL LibGuides webinar page within 24 hours. We encourage you to ask questions and have conversation in the chat. And we have some wonderful student and NCU alum moderators tonight. And with that, I'm passing the introductions to tonight's webinar over to Tabitha Myatt.
Yes. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in this ether today. I thank you all for joining us for our monthly IPE webinar series session. Tonight, we're going to be welcomed and, just enthralled in compliance with Dr. Donovan Williams. But before we get started, again, Tabitha Myatt, DHA student and IPE advisory committee member. And I would like to just share a couple of reminders for this evening's webinar. We ask that you guys ask questions at your, put them in a chat box. We will have time after the presentation for you guys to ask questions as well. In addition, I want to remind you that next month in November, we will be having our monthly webinar session as well. However, we're going to have it a week earlier due to the Thanksgiving holiday, which will be on the 17th. That webinar is entitled, and you'll see it in the comments and probably posted on the banners when you enter the NCU site. When you log on, it's entitled the National University Plaintree Silver Designation Promoting Person-Centered Care. Okay, that panel presentation will be delivered by Dr. Gloria McNeil and her team of colleagues. So we ask that you guys go ahead and register as soon as possible. I encourage some of your other colleagues to join us as well. We'll look forward to that webinar. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce to you Dr. Donovan Williams. Okay, Dr. Williams is an adjunct core professor and the Master and Doctor of Health Administration programs here at National University. His research focuses on exploring and addressing health disparities associated with racial, socioeconomic, and sexual minority groups and populations. Dr. Williams has a bachelor's degree in health informatics and information management, a master's degree in health services administration, and a PhD in public affairs with a conduct specialization in health services management and research. During his studies, Dr. Williams has also obtained several industry credentials as a registered health information administrator, certified HIPAA, privacy, and security expert, hence the presentation this evening, as well as healthcare information security and privacy practitioner, and is also certified in healthcare compliance. Dr. Williams has over 10 years experience in health information management, health services administration, and compliance, and has served in a number of leadership capacities, ranging from health information manager at large university medical centers to regional compliance administrator as well. In his free time, Dr. Williams likes to binge watch his favorite TV shows like The Big Bang Theory and The Office. So we welcome you, Dr. Williams, and I'll let you take it from here. Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Tabitha. Good afternoon, good evening, good night to everyone. I am so happy to be here with you all this evening, and I'm so glad that you were able to take some time out of your very busy schedules to discuss interdisciplinary partnerships, collaboration, and really learning how those things work in the healthcare compliance landscape. So my name is Dr. Donovan Williams, and my presentation this evening is titled Compliance Alliance, Leveraging Interdisciplinary Partnerships to Promote Compliance in the Healthcare Environment. So just a little bit about me, as Tabitha just shared. I have over 10 years experience in healthcare and healthcare information management, as well as health services administration and healthcare compliance in a variety of settings to include acute care, ambulatory care, Veterans Affairs hospitals, as well as multi-site and multi-specialty enterprises. I received my bachelor's degree in health informatics and information management the Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida, then went on to pursue my master's degree in health services administration and doctorate degree in health services management and research, all from the University of Central Florida in Orlando, Florida. Go Knights. And I also had the opportunity to obtain several industry credentials, those listed by Tabitha, my RHIA, CHPSE, HCISPP, and CHC. I know, OMG. I get tired of the abbreviations in healthcare as well, but we use them so often, right? So just a little bit of a little bit of an overview of what we'll talk about this evening. So we'll talk a little bit about collaboration and what that looks like, just as a general concept. We'll talk specifically about interdisciplinary collaboration and what that means in the healthcare landscape. We'll talk about some things to consider when collaborating, just tips, tricks, things to remember. Then we'll shift gears and talk a little bit about compliance. We'll walk through the purposes of a compliance program in healthcare. We'll talk about the 7 essential elements, and then we'll kind of go through some interdisciplinary collaboration in action. So we'll have some time to kind of talk through some various scenarios that might occur in the healthcare compliance landscape and how interdisciplinary collaboration is used to resolve those issues that may arise, okay? And just so you all are aware, I much prefer just interactive and engaging presentations. So if at any point, I can clarify something, like Tabitha and our CTL support indicated, please feel free to use the chat. Please feel free to ask any questions that you might have. If I need to slow down, please let me know. I tend to, get very passionate and speak very quickly. So, if at any point you have anything that's just on your mind, you need to get it out, just please feel free to get it out, okay? I would hope that, if you are not on camera, and that's fine, that when the time comes for questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and, we can engage in discourse as needed, all right? Does that sound good to everyone? You guys can use the reactions and give me thumbs up, raise the hand, whatever you choose, okay? Alrighty, I see some interaction, that's great, okay. So let's talk about some thoughts about collaboration. So how many of you have heard some of these quotes before? Teamwork makes the dream work. That's by John C. Maxwell, right? Alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much, by Helen Keller. Individually we are one drop, together we are an ocean. And success is best when it's shared, and that's by Howard Schultz. So how many of you have heard these quotations before? I'm sure, depending on where you are in life, we've all come across at least 1 or 2 of these before. One very common, of course, that we hear all the time is teamwork makes the dream work, right? And, when you think about it, we collaborate in so many facets of life, and we'll talk a little bit in a second about kind of all those various scenarios where we do collaborate, but you realize that it's inherent to who we are as humans. We are very, very collaborative creatures. It's almost critical to our survival, I would say, right? Because there's nothing, I don't know everything about everything. And so I will have no problem leaning on someone else who may know something about something that I don't know, so that we can kind of share in that collaborative effort, okay? So let's talk about the fundamentals of collaboration. So Dr. Abe Agbanyem in 2015, he published a book that focused on the fundamentals of collaboration. And there were 5 concepts that Dr. Agbanyem indicated kind of underscored collaboration, those being trust, respect, willingness, empowerment, and communication. So when you think about trust, right, you're much less likely to collaborate with someone if you don't trust them, right? I mean, think about it. When we go through our day-to-day lives, if there's people that we don't necessarily trust, whether that be with our own personal information, whether that be with, trusting someone to help us at work, if we don't trust someone, we're much less likely to collaborate with these individuals. But on the other hand, right, you may need to collaborate with someone in order for you to gain that trust in someone, right? So you're going to need to engage with this person much more frequently. You're going to need to, lean on this person much more frequently in order for you to develop that shared trust. The same can be said about respect, and that can be, the respect for one another, the respect of opinions, backgrounds, differences of opinions, that kind of thing. All of these things are paramount to successful collaboration. So when you think about that, with limited exposure, right, to any individual, to any process, anything, you don't necessarily know what you don't know, right? There's those unknown unknowns. But in order for you to respect those differing opinions, those backgrounds, those belief systems, values, those kinds of things, you're going to need that exposure. And how else do you get that exposure if not by collaborating? So, it's interesting to see kind of the interplay between these concepts and the overarching concept of collaboration. You realize that one, needs the other to succeed. Willingness. So the will and intention is a huge part of collaboration, and the willingness to trust others, the willingness to respect others, the willingness to communicate, the willingness to work toward a shared goal is all important to successful collaboration. And finally, the empowerment of oneself or others, that's also critical to collaboration. So you may be able to lean on your teammates if you need to keep the train going. And similarly, your teammates should be able to lean on you for empowerment when the time comes. If there's someone who becomes disillusioned, right, or fatigued, you may be needed to kind of empower that person. You collaborate, you say, hey, we can do this. Hey, what do you need from me? How can I help to lighten your load? And so you see there where that empowerment comes into play. You need to be able to empower one another on a team in order for you to continue to work toward that shared goal. And finally, and quite possibly the most important concept of them all, is communication. So communication is likely the most important concept because you can't trust someone without communicating with them first. You won't know what to respect about someone if you don't communicate. You won't be able to develop that shared willingness and interest if you don't communicate. You won't be able to empower someone if you don't communicate. So communicate is quite possibly the most important of these 5 concepts as posited by Dr. Agbanyam. And you must communicate effectively in order for you to build trust, to develop mutual respect, to keep up the engagement and empowerment, and to develop that will to succeed. So these are just a few, and of course, this is not exhaustive in any way, right? But these are just a few of the common areas where we may collaborate in various industries and throughout life. So let's talk through some of them for a second. So if you can, go to the chat or unmute yourself, but what might be some ways where you might collaborate in school, whether that be, at the grade level, whether that be at the university level? What might be some occurrences or instances where you may need to collaborate with someone? What do you all think?
Team projects.
Yes, team projects. So, we've all had team projects where we've, maybe been forced to work with others, right? Maybe we've been forced to work with others, and not only to get ourselves out of our shells, but really to begin to understand and develop that underlying concept of collaboration, because there's no way to succeed professionally without collaboration, right? No one man can do it all on their own. When you think about research, even insofar as your development of a dissertation, there's always going to be a need to collaborate, right? You have your chair, you have your subject matter expert, you have your academic reader, you have those individuals who bring certain strengths to the table where you may lack. And so that from that point, it's kind of developing in you the importance of collaboration, because once you have completed your dissertation or your master's thesis or your capstone project, whatever the case might be, and you matriculate into the professional arena, or if you're already in the professional arena, you may already be kind of used to collaborating, right? When you think about research, you'll almost find that whenever you're looking at a research paper, there's always probably a minimum of 2 to anywhere up to 12 collaborators on a research project. And when you think about it, you might say, well, this paper is about 10 pages. Why did it take 12 of us to work on this paper, right? So when you think about it that way, there's a need to lean on someone. There's always going to be someone who is stronger at something than you are. Now, whether that be you engaging with a theorist to kind of help you to begin to think of things theoretically and understand what theories may underpin whatever concept it is that you're studying, or perhaps you are engaging with someone who specializes in the target population that you are looking to study. There's always going to be a need for you to collaborate and research. Sports. And I'm not sure if any of you are sports aficionados. When you think about sports teams, there's always going to be someone that plays an integral role, right? There's the, if you're in soccer, there's the forward, there's the goalie, right? Each person plays a role, but each of those roles kind of works together to accomplish that shared goal. Same thing with government. The various levels of government are intended to work together to, make sure that they're providing as best and as meaningful of a life experience for its citizens and residents. In the healthcare environment, our physicians lean on the documentation of our nurses and physicians lean on the accuracy of the information provided by lab technicians, imaging techs, radiologists. There's the healthcare in and of itself is a very, very collaborative effort. And this goes into, just even the care that's provided. In order for a patient to be well-rounded in the care that he or she may receive, you're going to need to tap into so many different specializations, so many different fields. And that's the reason why, hospitals have upwards of hundreds to thousands of staff members, because each department, each unit plays an integral role in the overall wellness and health and care for that individual. All right. So what about construction? Who can tell me some ways, when you think about construction, who can tell me some ways where collaboration is critical in construction? Let's think, I guess, of when we're building a house or a house is being built. What might be the different expertise that might be incorporated into the collaborative effort? What do you all think?
Dr. Williams?
Yes.
You need the architect to set the standard for what will be in the construction. If that's what you're speaking of, are we talking about like a home construction collaboration?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Dr. Rogers. So you need the architect, right? It all starts with the architect who is setting the stage, building the plans. You need the masons, the construction workers who are going to set the foundation and start to build the house. You need the plumbers, and each of these groups is not going to have the same individuals. Granted, there are persons who are, who are skilled in that way. But when you think about it, generally speaking, there's going to be different persons who bring different levels of expertise to the project to ensure its success. You have the plumbers, you have the electricians who are going to run the wiring and connect you to the grid. You may have the persons who come in and install your cable. You think there's all these different facets and ways that we need to collaborate when we're thinking about construction. So
let's get to the very end where the quality is assessed by the inspectors, right?
Absolutely.
So they come in and make sure everything is done per code.
Up to code.
Right.
Exactly. So you have the inspectors and surveyors who come in after the fact to make sure that before we allow this person to inhabit this space, we need to make sure that everything was done in alignment with the codes and regulations that are set, those quality standards that are put into place. And, that's kind of what healthcare compliance is all about, right? Making sure that everything that we're doing, all the practices that we're engaging in are in alignment with the codes, the regulations, the rules, laws that are put in place, not only by the federal government or state statute, but also just by the organization itself.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. So
we have a couple of, Dr. Williams, not to cut you off, but we had a couple of comments in the chat box. Research, healthcare settings, government funding, getting permits related to the construction, which ties into the inspectors, as well as relative to provide the open posting of property, bank to finance the mortgage.
And what's interesting about those, thank you so much, Tabitha. What's interesting about all those responses is that you realize that, in the discourse that Dr. Rogers and I just engaged in, everything that was just named in the chat are all different, right? So that right there shows the importance of collaboration. There are things that I may not think about, that Dr. Rogers may not have thought about, that you all might think of. And so that shows the strength in not only collaboration, but really interdisciplinary collaboration. I work in healthcare compliance, and my background is health information management. Dr. Rogers may be skilled in nursing and understand it from that perspective. Understanding the strength in interdisciplinary collaboration is why we're all here. Okay, so interdisciplinary collaboration, and Baggs and Schmidt said in 1988 and Fagan in 1992 that it's the capability of professionals to effectively embrace complementary roles within a team, meaning that they work collaboratively and cooperatively, and they share the responsibilities for problem solving and make the decisions needed to formulate and carry out plans. So it allows for the evolution of ideas. And I think we spoke to this earlier, Veronica, if you recall, we were talking about kind of the evolution of ideas and sharing of experiences, and the strength in not only being able to understand someone's perspective, but also be able to maybe understand a novel way of thinking that we wouldn't have engaged in before, had we tried to complete whatever the project was independently. So you kind of gather those mixtures of characteristics from those various disciplines. And it's a complex phenomenon that's often formed between two or more persons, or fields or teams, what have you. You can collaborate across the microscape, the metascape, the macro. At the macro level, collaboration can happen on any of those landscapes. But the importance is that you're working toward achieving a common goal. So it invites people with firsthand knowledge and expertise of the situation or the problem at hand to drive change, okay? And while at the same time, it creates opportunities for better learning and for cross-training. You can learn so much by collaborating. And so just some things to consider when we're collaborating. So you want to keep an open mind, right? There's not going to be any project that you approach where you know everything about a project. And I think it would be a disservice to ourselves, right? A disservice to the overall success of the team for us to be, I won't say arrogant, but so confident that we believe that we know everything about whatever this topic is, and that there's no one that can teach us anything additional, okay? So at the start of any project, it's very likely that there's going to be differing opinions and just variance in thoughts and views. And you shouldn't be afraid to over communicate, just so that you can explain not only your perspectives, but really better understand somebody else's perspectives, because that will help you guys to kind of recalibrate whatever ideas, thoughts, and opinions are being shared, to really get those synthesized into approaching more closely that common goal. Okay? Collaborators should also be supportive of that common goal. And collective impact, and that's the overall accomplishment. What is it that we're looking to accomplish? That necessitates coordinated actions. So actions toward the common goal should always be coordinated among the group, okay? There's no one person that should not know, what the other person is doing, right? When you're working on a team. I know, of course, we know that old adage, don't let your right hand know what the left hand is doing. That's not what we're talking about here, okay? That's a completely different situation. What we're talking about here is the strength in collaboration and knowing, what the other persons on the team are doing and how their contributions can get the team closer, not only to maybe developing that common shared goal, but really to accomplishing whatever that shared goal is. It's really paramount to the overall success of the group. And, don't be afraid to speak up. So if you believe that a particular practice or process is not working, or, maybe there are some gaps that you're identifying, do not be afraid when working on a team or collaborating to speak up and say so. Because, not only can the team examine it and, like I said, identify those gaps and maybe reduce or eliminate any gaps, but also you could be the catalyst to encourage others to do the same on your team. And the strength in that is really not only being able to openly express your views, but really creating an openness among the group to know that, hey, we can share our opinions, right? We can make recommendations. We can even be critical of whatever it is that they're working on. But my colleagues will respect me enough to and respect my opinions enough to consider what I'm saying. My colleagues trust me enough to understand that what I'm bringing to the table could be vital in the success of this project. And so it kind of goes back to those underpinning concepts that we discussed, that trust, that empowerment, the willingness, the communication. It's really all working together to make sure that we can all accomplish that shared goal. And like I said, it really goes back to that empowerment. And so when you think about, appreciating individual strengths and giving credit where due, for lots of persons, we find our drive and our determination in not necessarily getting the validation, but really knowing that our counterparts or our teammates are recognizing our efforts and that they believe, just as we do, that our efforts are adding to the success of the group. Okay, and so don't be afraid to acknowledge the individual contributions of your teammates, but understand at the same time that the overall success is a shared product. And so when you think about that on the flip side, if you're the individual that's inputting all the hard, all kinds of hard work, and you feel as though your efforts are going unnoticed, that's not a time for you to, take it as a slight or, become to become offended at the fact that your efforts may not be just readily acknowledged. But it's really important to understand that the overall success of the group should not be undermined, right? The overall success of the group is the group's success, regardless of the fact that you may have input, 60% of the work, the overall product is the result of collaboration. And so you have to be very careful about, when you're thinking about appreciating those individual strengths, because at the same time, you have to make sure that it's emphasized among the group. And, that goes back to that communication, that it's emphasized among the group that the overall success is that of the group and not of any individual. So now let's shift gears for a second. So we talked about collaboration and kind of what that looks like in healthcare and what that looks like in everyday life. So how many of you are familiar with compliance in healthcare and what a compliance program is all about in healthcare? Okay, I see Veronica raising her hand. Okay, so, and in this image can maybe kind of give you some indication as to what healthcare compliance may be all about. Regulations, rules, standards, policies. Let's go ahead and talk about. And before I do this, I see that there's a question: how does a group of strangers build cohesion? And so that's a very good question. I would say that it goes back to that communication, okay? And those unknown unknowns. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know how to respect the differing backgrounds of an individual, but it's important for us to communicate so that we can not only understand where persons are coming from, but really understand the differences in the ways that we might think, so that when we're working on projects, you can further communicate, better communicate. You might, better understand how best to convey information to a person. Each person has differing learning styles, and that might be something that should be communicated at the very start of the project. Maybe there are ways that you work better. Maybe you are an audiovisual learner or a kinesthetic learner. Maybe you need to get your hands in the weeds of things to better understand things. And so communicating those things up front, and I will always say, over communicate, because communication is really what provides that context to understanding one another as individuals. We cannot understand one another as individuals if we do not communicate. And observation is useful and powerful, but the communication, really getting that firsthand experience, is what really drives that development of that cohesion. So I think it's a very good question. I would say, I'm no professional in, or no expert in collaboration, but in my experience, what I found is that communication, and we hear this all the time in all relationships, right? Communication is what's key. You over communicate, tell people what your likes and dislikes are, tell your teammates how you prefer for information to be conveyed to you. How do you prefer to collaborate? Do you prefer to to do things via Zoom or Teams? Do you prefer in-person meetings? Do you prefer no meetings at all? You just want to collaborate on a Google Doc? You present that information up front, and it will better help you to be able to build that cohesion, because each person will be aware of what's needed to be successful as a group. Does that answer your question? Awesome. All right, so the purpose of a compliance program in healthcare. So a compliance program at its core, and I'm not sure if any of you are familiar, and you probably are, with Enron, right? We all know about the Enron scandal from decades ago where, you know, Enron was engaging in fraudulent activity, kind of padding their assets, that kind of thing, and really trying to posit as though they are, or posture their company as being valued at this amount, when really that's not even the case. And so they were engaging in fraudulent activity. And so that kind of sparked the federal government to put in place the federal sentencing guidelines for organizations that says that organizations must engage in ethical business practices. And this is across the board. All businesses should engage in ethical business practices. That means that they shouldn't be engaging in waste. They shouldn't be engaging in abuse. They shouldn't be engaging in fraud. And so that was then extrapolated to the healthcare environment, because healthcare, you know, is a business, right? We know that people are at the center of what we do, but really on the back end, healthcare is a business just like any other business. And so in that vein, we have to think of it as a business, meaning that we have to apply the same standards that we would to, say, an investment firm or a financial company or a bank to a hospital, right? Same things. In those cases, we're dealing with, you know, person's livelihoods, their money, but in these cases, we're dealing with life and death. So when you think about it, it's even more critical, right? It's even more important for us to make sure that we're engaging in ethical business practices and practices that are in alignment with quality of care standards. So that's the overall purpose of a compliance program, is to demonstrate an organization's commitment to integrity. It says that we are going to carry out ethical business practices. We are going to engage with patients in a way that is that meets the standard of care and the quality of care that's expected of our fields, whether that be medicine, whether that be nursing. We are going to engage with patients in a way that aligns with our standards. We provide education and prevention and early detection of issues. We encourage the reporting of issues. Compliance programs detect and identify and mitigate instances of fraud, waste, and abuse. It identifies and documents and manages instances of perceived or actual conflicts of interest. It develops policies and procedures and makes sure that those policies and procedures are being effectively and consistently enforced across the organization. It's recommending sanctions for issues of non-compliance when we find that persons are not engaging in ethical business practices, and we are doing that in a consistent manner across the board, and really ensuring that the facility and organization compliance is in compliance with federal and state regulations. And so with that, in the federal sentencing guidelines, there were 7 critical elements that the federal government stated are really, really important and essential to establishing and maintaining an effective compliance program. So the first would be our standards of conduct. It's very important for team members for us to document, right, our expectations of our team members. How do we expect them to behave? How do we expect them to practice? What is it that we expect of them as team members of our organization? So we do that through our written policies and procedures and our codes of conduct. We also have oversight of a compliance program, and that can be in the form of a compliance officer, that can be in the form of a compliance committee, or just really generally any high-level oversight. There has to be someone or a team of someones who are responsible for ensuring that the organization is operating in a way that is in compliance with state and federal regulations, as well as the internal policies and procedures. You provide education and training, so that's done through the formal new employee orientations, annual training and education, as well as targeted trainings whenever issues arise. Open communication, there has to be a way for patients, staff, whomever to report issues of noncompliance. And then from there, you have to manage those incidents of noncompliance. And so that means that you have to have a process in place to respond to those issues. You have to be able to perform prompt investigations and respond to those issues in a manner that, and so that goes to the enforcement, and that's in a manner that is consistent across the board. So, those standards of those disciplinary standards, those code of conduct and policies and procedures that kind of identify, if you do this, it could result in this. It has to be applied consistently across the board. And so what that means is that if we find that there's an entry-level staff member, let's say a registrar, or even a mid-level staff member, such as a department manager or supervisor, if we're finding that they're engaging in unethical business practices, and we decide to terminate that employee for that offense, and we find later that there's a C-suite level, let's say a COO or CFO, who's engaging in unethical business practices, and maybe the two situations are parallel, we have to ensure that the way that we respond to the higher level individual is the same way that we would have responded to the maybe lower level individual. We can't give the appearance that we're protecting and shielding the persons that are managing the organization and giving them the benefits that we would not give to our staff. It gives the appearance that maybe some staff are expendable, and that is something that we do not want to do in healthcare, or really just in any business in general. And finally, we have to implement monitoring and auditing schemes. So that's systems that are in place for identifying compliance risks. And so we can't just depend on reporting mechanisms, right? We can't just say, oh, okay, well, we'll just wait for things to come through the hotline, because in healthcare in particular, there tends to be a culture of silence. There are persons who don't want to report their coworkers, even though they see them doing something wrong. They don't want to report it because they don't want to create a tiff within the group. They don't want to drive a wedge between them and somebody else. And so there's this culture of silence. And so as healthcare compliance officials, we cannot depend on reporting mechanisms to identify those instances of fraud, waste, and abuse, or any issues of noncompliance. And so the government requires that we implement monitoring and auditing schemes that will allow us as an organization to detect those instances of noncompliance, even if they aren't reported. And so you can kind of see how all of these things work together to create what we know today to be our effective and essential compliance programs. And so some common issues that we deal with in healthcare compliance, and even of all of these, I think this is about 23 different issues and regulations that we might deal with. This does not run the gamut, right? There's so many more things to consider. So you have things like EMTALA issues, and if you're not familiar, that's the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act that says that if somebody should approach your organization or you're in active labor or in an emergency situation, you can't just divert them elsewhere or turn them away without first stabilizing that patient. So we deal with those issues, and that's a reportable offense from organization to organization. So if we were to send a patient to an area hospital or ED without stabilizing them, that ED can then report our facility to the government for non-compliance with EMTALA. Things like Stark Law, self-referral and anti-kickback statutes, CMS compliance and coding and billing, the risk to physical safety and violence, loss of equipment, registration and verification errors. There's so many things on a day-to-day basis that you can be tasked with kind of ensuring is occurring in a compliant manner. And when you think about it this way, and I'll give you guys a bit of background. In my capacity, I am responsible for managing the compliance programs for 4 hospitals, 80 odd physician practices, EDs, imaging centers. The number just goes up and up and up, right? So there's no way that I can be in all places at once. And there's no way that I can handle all of this by myself, even though I am charged with that responsibility. So that's where in compliance, collaboration is so important. So some of the common fields and backgrounds that we collaborate with might be human resources, legal, IT and information security, quality management, risk management, physicians, nurses, patient experience, HIM, pharmacy, security. You realize that when you go through this list, you're like, that's pretty much every department within the hospital, right? And when you think about it, there's so many laws that kind of regulate the healthcare environment that there's no way that the compliance professional alone can accomplish compliance without leaning on the individuals that carry that expertise in that area. So we may be knowledgeable of the law and the mechanisms that are required to remain compliant with that law, but when it comes to the ongoing monitoring and making sure that those workflows are in place on a day-to-day basis, we lean on the strength of these individuals. But you'll see here, even with this long list, there's one particular group that I haven't mentioned, right? That's our patients. So we have to engage with our patients, and we have to collaborate often with our patients because they're the hallmark of what we do in healthcare. Okay, if a patient is unhappy, we have to do everything in our power to resolve whatever that issue is. And that's because not only because, you know, it can be bad for optics, but really because we in compliance and we in healthcare put the patient at the core of everything we do. They're very, very important and they're critical to our missions, and they're really why we are here. So if we collaborate with patients often to investigate issues of non-compliance, whether that be privacy breaches, whether that be medical identity theft, whether that be quality of service issues or quality of care issues, if there is a surgical error or a risk management issue, a sentinel event, we often engage with patients and their families to carry out our investigations. We sometimes and often investigate and interview patients and their family members to understand from their perspective what happened, to gain better context about what may have surrounded the issue. What do they think may have led to the issue? And then we can take this information and kind of color our investigation and understand where we're going to take our investigation toward that resolution. And so collaboration action in compliance. So I wanted to walk through a few scenarios that, on a day-to-day basis, really, you might be responsible for carrying out or really being the compliance arm in. And so the first of which is, there's a large multi-hospital health system, and they're expanding their reach across state lines and acquiring a medium-sized children's hospital one state over. So we're talking about one health system purchasing another hospital or health system. So you can imagine, just based on that, the sale itself, that there's a lot of things to consider from a compliance perspective, right? One of the things being the due diligence. So before the prior sale, before that final sale goes through, there's what's called a due diligence review, and compliance partners with legal and partners with other leaders within the organization to perform this review to determine whether there are any risks with this purchase. So before our president or CEO signs on that bottom line, we want to make sure that we've done everything in our power to ensure that this organization that we are going to now subsume into our operations, that we're going to, that they're operating in a manner that's compliant and that can be consistent with the way that we practice. So in that review, we may look at things like outstanding litigation. And we can't do that without legal, not only legal in our organization, but also across state lines, partnering with the legal counsel for the other organization, as well as the compliance officials. We may need to understand what the common patient complaints are so that we can identify any trends and patterns. Do we have specific physicians that we're seeing that, okay, within this year's time, we've had maybe 100 complaints from patients about this one particular physician. Now, can we make a decision and say, okay, we will go ahead and purchase this facility, but maybe we don't want to extend an employment offer to this physician. So we're going to identify all of those risks before the final sale goes through, okay? And you can see that when we're thinking about all those layers, there's no way that one person can go through and do that. That review would take months to years if one person did it. So you collaborate across disciplines, you collaborate across fields, you collaborate across state lines, and you find out the information that you need to know, and you make the decision based on that information, but you cannot do it alone. And even after that purchase is made, when you think about now bringing on probably hundreds of staff to thousands of staff members, there's going to be a need to onboard those staff members into your way of doing things, right? That might require a partnership with HR, with organizational learning, because there's going to be a need to educate and train these new staff members so that they understand what our standards of conduct are, what our standards of practice are, that those codes of conduct, standards of practice, the policies and procedures that we spoke to earlier. It's important for them to now understand how we practice so that when they come in and they join our enterprise, they're also now engaging in business practices that are ethical, and that they don't bring any practices from their old job that may not have been ethical, that they believed was ethical because maybe their compliance department wasn't doing their job effectively enough. And I'll take a pause, and I see a question here. Looks like Dr. Rogers is asking, as a patient, when we receive our monthly EOB, how do we dispute charges that were submitted to our insurance that we know did not take place, i.e. an electrocardiogram or a televisit? And actually, that's a very, very good question. So let's talk about the second point here, right? So it says a patient contacts the facility, and it's kind of similar to your question, Dr. Rogers. A patient contacts a facility asserting that she was not seen on October 10th, but received an invoice for a visit on the date of service.
Exactly.
So this can be, sorry?
No, I was saying exactly. It's that second bullet.
Yeah, so so when you're thinking about you're receiving a bill that has charges on it that you're like, I didn't receive this echocardiogram, I didn't receive this this I wasn't even at the hospital at this day. Matter of fact, I was in Vegas. How could I have been in Georgia if I was in Vegas, right? So when you think about disputing these things, you contact your compliance department at that facility, and they're going to conduct an investigation into the issue. And that right there is going to require some collaboration in and of itself, because let's just say you say, I wasn't even in town when that happened. We, in our practice is to say, okay, well, you know what? If you truly believe that your identity could have been compromised, we recommend that you go to law enforcement. And what that's going to do is it's going to put it on record that that your identity may have been compromised, and it allows law enforcement to look not only look at this instance, but also any other instances that may come up in future where someone's using your identity. And similarly, internally, we will conduct a thorough investigation. We may partner with security for a review of security footage to determine whether the face on this video matches the face on your ID. And in a lot of cases, we find that these are two completely different persons. We might have an 18-year-old person who came in the facility, but they came in with and told us that their name was Jacqueline Rogers, and that she was 50 years old, and we can't really question that. If the patient tells us, I am 50 years old, she can look no day over 12 years old, but we have to say, okay, this is the information that you're giving us, we're going to have to register you in that way. But that speaks to those auditing and monitoring mechanisms that we have in place to review the information that we're collecting to make sure that it's accurate. And so you have teams on the back end that works in collaboration with compliance, and those might be teams such as data integrity, revenue cycle management, those kinds of groups that are working to ensure that all of the information that's being collected at registration is accurate, that we have documentation to support the information that we collected, that we are checking Equifax reports to match up identities. I mean, it's a very, very complex process, but there's no way that the compliance professional can do that on their own. So you partner with those groups and you entrust them with the authority to kind of perform those reviews to make sure that the information that's being collected is accurate and that the person who's being billed is in fact that person. And if we find that they are not, then we work collaboratively with law enforcement. Not only do we zero out on our end and say, okay, our bad, we do find that this, that this medical identity theft is substantiated and that this was not you. We also work with law enforcement to provide them with our findings so that they can be aware of what we found, and it will help them to inform their future investigations and hopefully bring some justice to the situation.
Right. And you read my mind, because the exact thing happened that you said. I was out of town when I received this bill. Actually, it was the explanation of benefits for a Medicare billing.
Mhm.
And it was for a televisit that I did not have with a physician that was in another location from the location that I visited.
Mhm.
And my problem was, how was that received by the people that I was challenging them, number one, and number two, I didn't want the EKG to be on my record if it was not my EKG, right?
Right. Absolutely. And what's interesting is that with as we move to more virtual services and providing telehealth across state lines, this is going to become an even greater issue. And so it is something that we're watching in the compliance field to look for, because now with these systems that are all interoperable, right? You have persons in Wichita that can, because they have Epic and we have Epic, and maybe a patient went to them a while back and now they're coming to us, they can see those records because, we have this open sharing of information. And so it's going to become an increasing issue where we're seeing instances of misregistrations. Maybe they're pulling down information that they're thinking is this person, but really it's not. We're going to see greater issues of insurance issues where insurances are denying, that they're denying coverages for certain persons because of potential fraud or, what have you. And so it is something that we're watching in the healthcare compliance and regulatory field, because we know that it's going to become an issue as we continue to do business across state lines.
Right.
So
And I think it was a very innocent thing that happened, because I know there's another Jacqueline Rogers in my area that goes to the same group. And so I think it was just a matter of pulling up the wrong Jacqueline Rogers and not verifying the date of birth.
Exactly. Not looking at those national patient safety goals that says you check 3 identifiers to make sure that you have the correct person in front of you. And that happens all the time. I would say that that's probably one of my most common investigations that I conduct, is really those misregistrations, because they happen so frequently. You have, when you think healthcare is a very intense environment, right? You have to do things very quickly. And so it's very, we're humans, we make errors. So it's very common for us to make mistakes.
Absolutely. And remind us, Dr. Williams, about those 3 verifiers, date of birth.
So those 3 verifiers would be your first and last name. That's one identifier. Sometimes there's some confusion that the first name is one and the last name is the second, but really the full name is that first identifier. Your second identifier would be your date of birth. And then if those 2, if you're still not certain, your third identifier would be something like your address, phone number, email address, last 4 of the social, or the full social, whatever information you have at your disposal. You want to make sure that you are, at each step, that you're validating that you have the correct person in front of you. So I always tell my staff, if you're still uncertain, go to the next identifier and verify it. If you're still uncertain, go to the next one. So sometimes you might find yourself verifying up to 6 identifiers, because people's addresses can change, their phone numbers can change, so it's really important for you to just kind of make sure that you have the correct person in front of you.
Right. So Dr. Williams and Dr. Rogers, quick question on the same topic. So what comes to my mind, I get a lot, is HIPAA, right? So now that my information has been sent out, but it's been sent to the wrong Jacqueline Rogers, how do we ensure the safety and privacy of the other Jacqueline Rogers?
Yeah, it's a good question.
This is a day-to-day reality that we're dealing with right now in the Medicare world. And Kate, people find out that their information has been sent to another person.
Right. It's such a good question.
I deal with that on a daily basis as well. And that's, I would say, the second, because, when those misregistrations occur, if we don't catch it early enough, and we have a team that's responsible for trying to catch those before we send out bills. But if we don't catch those quickly enough, then the bill gets sent out to the wrong person. And we have individuals who are saying now, well, my privacy has been compromised. So we conduct a thorough investigation, and we try as best possible to get that information back. We may send a FedEx envelope and say, hey, we understand that you may have received someone else's information. Can you not only send it back to us, but also sign this affirmation that says, in good faith, that you have not copied this individual's information, that you have not shared it, that those kinds of things. We're trying as best possible to gather those assurances, because that's all that we can do is hope. We can hope that they didn't copy someone's information in a way that they're going to commit fraud or do anything that's unethical. But if it does happen, and if it rises to the level of a breach, then we would be responsible for reporting that to the Office of Civil Rights as a breach of privacy.
Right.
And then with that, depending on the severity.
7 minutes on the clock here. If you guys have any questions, all the additional participants, please put them in the chat or just chime in. And Dr. Williams, I'll let you recap and finalize.
All right. So, and this is good timing because this is my last slide. So just some things to remember about collaboration, and particularly in healthcare compliance. Collaboration is both efficient and effective. You maximize the impact by sharing resources such as time and effort. You partner across disciplines, and it promotes shared and continued learning and innovation. Compliance and healthcare compliance is an inherently collaborative effort. One person cannot do it alone, and we lean on one another to really make sure that the organization is compliant, because we are doing it not only to protect our patients, but also to protect our staff and employees as well. Interdisciplinary collaboration in healthcare mitigates risk, and that could be clinical risk, that can be or organizational risk or operational risk, as well as just really compliance risk, privacy risk, security risks. Interdisciplinary collaboration mitigates those risks because there are going to be things that I may not be able to think of technologically speaking, that I might lean on my information security guys or information technology team to really think of. And so it's really a collaborative effort. Collaboration is ingrained in our very nature. If you are a Sicilian, you may know that the philosopher stated that humans by our very nature are social animals. We are communal. You know, it's really core to our existence, and it's really core to what we do on a day-to-day basis. And in collaboration, you know, don't forget to have fun. It's so easy to kind of drown yourself in especially in compliance, in kind of the black and white of things, and you know, things can become very rigid. So I would say, you know, always read the room, look for times where persons maybe become defeated, look for, you know, signs of fatigue, and introduce levity. You know, that levity is always useful, not insofar that, you know, you want to distract from the overall goal, but, you know, provide that levity, make people smile, because it's going to make that collaboration so much easier and so much more effective, and really better allow for the overall achievement and accomplishment of that shared goal. And these are just some of my references. And if by the end of this presentation, you feel anything like this gentleman here, please know that you can reach out to me. You can shoot me a text message at 470-483-6502. You can email me at dwilliams4@nu.edu. Or if you'd like to connect on LinkedIn and, you know, continue this conversation, please feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. That's Dr. Donovan J. Williams. And I thank you all so much for your time. And I hope that this has been very helpful and useful to you all. And I wish you a very, very good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. I have one question before we let everybody go. So is the customer always 100% right?
That's a loaded question, but yeah, you know, no, the customer is not always 100% right. I'll give you an example. I conducted an investigation recently where a patient said that a team member of ours had copied down their credit card information and then, you know, placed an order on their credit card. And she was adamant. She said that I know it was her because she took my card in the back, and, you know, she was the only person to have it. And then in my investigation, I learned that just a day before, she was at another area hospital, and the address where the order was going to be sent to was at, you know, in that area, not near us. And so, you know, the customer is not always right, even though they can be very passionate and feel as though they know exactly what's going on. It's very important for you to conduct a thorough investigation so that you can, you know, definitively substantiate what's being said and really gather the facts, and not, you know, go off of assumptions. Great question.
Thank you. Okay, so let's see here. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Veronica, do you see anything? I don't want to overlook anyone.
I didn't see anything. Just a great thank you for Dr. Williams for this fantastic presentation, and Dr. Rogers for having that conversation to kind of explore those things. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure.
All right, Dr. Mass, I'll turn it over to you. If you have any last minute comments or feedback.
You're muted, Dr. Mass.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. It was really a pleasure, and great insights and good tips on how to instill trust and get support in that collaborative process. And don't forget to join us next month for our phenomenal panel presentation on the silver designation plane tree that National University has under the leadership of Dr. Gloria McNeil and her team. So thanks, everybody, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.